People are starting to join our conversation here. For anyone who's just joining, Bruce actually and I have already started the conversation, so everyone's a little late. For those of you who are here already, welcome, and welcome to Change for Good. It is Thursday, May 14th. It's 11 o'clock here in Toronto. And today I have the super great pleasure of speaking with Bruce MacDonald, who's the president and CEO of Imagine Canada. Welcome, Bruce.
Thanks very much. It's wonderful to be here.
It's great. It's great to have you here, and so it's really one of those great, pleasures, because you and I have known each other for such a long time. So it's been 9 weeks of working at home, and I think it's actually the 10th week of working at home, and I'm actually losing, of course, all of us are losing track of the time, but I was thinking that it's been about that since then that we decided to create Change for Good, because we thought it would be a great idea to have a place for community and for inspiration for the people who are watching, who are all change makers, and we're all in this together. And we do that by having conversations with people like you, Bruce, who can share what they're seeing, what they're doing differently, and really what their vision of the future is. And so welcome everyone to our conversation. Also wanted to say to everyone who's here watching, it's not just my conversation with Bruce, it's yours too. So please, if you think of any questions that you'd like to ask Bruce, don't wait to the end, just share them now, and we're going to get to them as we can during our conversation. And welcome again, Bruce. And I was thinking just earlier, you and I have been talking about social change literally for years.
Mm-hmm.
And except it's usually in a coffee shop across the street from your office.
Exactly.
Right. And here we are, in very different in our homes. So I think just to kick this off, we'd love to hear from you. Like, what is your situation at home? What are you experiencing? How is this affecting your life and your work?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks very much for the opportunity to be here. I'm really delighted and honored to be part of this. Yeah, so it's interesting. In my end, I'm a commuter, so I work in downtown Toronto, but I live as part of Hamilton, and so on one hand, there has been the pleasure of not having to get on a GO train and a subway every day. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, work is ever present when it's in your home, and I oddly enough, as an organization that is spending a lot of time working with the federal government, we've never been busier. Because government officials are working almost around the clock and on weekends to try and provide support to Canada and Canadians, it's the same for us, because we're sort of making sure that they've got the information and everything. It's obviously a different routine, and in our household as well, my wife works in long-term care. And so that's an interesting other part of Canadian society. And so vigilance is a key word with us. It's also meant that as our daughters are coming home from post-secondary for the summer, that our practices and protocols around the house or not going out. I find that I'm one now who is very much in the house, just to make sure that we're not doing anything that jeopardizes her work and the residents with whom she interacts on a daily basis, because it's one thing for one of us to get sick at whatever varying degree, but if she were to take that into her place of work, it's obviously the consequences are much more dire. So yeah, different times, and then likely also a different go back to routine. We are projecting that as people start to return to work, that hours might be different because of the nature of being connected directly to long-term care facilities.
Right. And so you're obviously, so you're such a direct connection there with you and your family. And the other thing I'm always curious about, and I think people here are really interested in knowing a lot of people who are listening to actually lead organizations as well. So how has this changed how you work with your team at Imagine during such an important time?
Yeah, I think we were a little bit fortunate in this. So because we've had staff in Ottawa and Montreal as well as Toronto, we've been using cloud-based technology to work together for a while. So in a sense, what we've had to do here is scale up so that staff, maybe in finance or administration, who weren't necessarily using that technology on a daily or weekly basis, they've had to get more up to speed on it. But we were already doing it, so that it felt a bit easier. Part of it is we've totally changed the way I actually see some of my staff more now than I did when we went to work every day. Right. Because we had a protocol of meeting daily for about 5 weeks. We've now moved that to twice a week with some other meetings in between. And really, it's just about staying connected. And different people take turns each week hosting, and so they would invite us to start off with some kind of wacky story or a different perspective or something like that. Each host brought their own sort of flavor to it, but really it's about ensuring that people are informed, connected, can even just have a conversation to say they're struggling. And we had someone this morning who was saying they just had a tough few days where they are feeling very isolated and disconnected. And I think just being able to share that with their colleagues, and I know someone else reached out to them after that video conference to just have a personal chat with them. I think this is the way we can sort of support each other during these times.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm getting a sense that there was a sort of novelty for a lot of people of working remotely for a while. And then in the last couple of weeks, you do feel, I think, that many people have started to feel the mental health stress and challenge of it. So, I think things like you described are great ideas. The other thing that of course is, it just, the conversation with you is so important today, I feel, because, I think as we've all heard, during the crisis, vulnerable people are even more vulnerable. And the thing is that the organizations that are social change organizations, the nonprofits, the charities, and social enterprises as well, that are there to serve those organizations are, I think, as you've described, literally in danger of going bankrupt.
Yes.
So you're at the center of this ecosystem of all those organizations. Love you to share what you're seeing and hearing from those organizations. How are they coping? What are they doing?
Yeah, it's that's a very fair summation. I mean, our observations at this point is that this pandemic, this crisis, has illuminated the fault lines in our system. It's really sort of shone a spotlight on the cracks in the foundation of social good in this country. If you think that today still many of the services are delivered by classic registered charities, what this has illustrated is that our lack of investment, if you will, in key things like technology and infrastructure, and even encouraging organizations, not penalizing them, to build cash reserves, is now being seen in real time as short-sighted. Right. So organizations are experiencing drops in revenues, but first and foremost, the issue that they're running into is cash. Do they have cash to continue to pay the staff, to keep services going, or to work with volunteers to keep the services going, or to work to adapt programs that can no longer be delivered by staff or volunteers? And when you combine that with an inability of most organizations to get bank loans because they don't have buildings or big collateral or capital items rather that they can use as collateral, it's kind of a perfect storm. Mm-hmm. And so what we see are organizations who are trying to sort of hang on, hopefully accessing things like the wage subsidy program or wage subsidy or rent subsidy that's been announced by the federal government, as they rethink what their business model is going to look like. We did a survey of organizations and we had about 1,400 respondents. And I thought one of the most telling findings was that 18% had said they were already ceasing operations or fully suspending programs.
18%.
18. We've been out of the field for 2 weeks. So we are expecting that number to go up as the implications of canceled fundraising events, canceled door-to-door canvassing, etc., really lands. Mm-hmm. And so this is definitely going to be a difficult time right across the sector. There is no mission or cause area that is immune.
So also that makes me think about the federal government and their response to this. And I have to say that it seemed to me over the last number of years that that governments have tried to do their best to get out of funding organizations and causes. Of course, here we've seen the government step into supporting businesses, and I know there's a program that relates to charities as well. But what's the situation? Is government doing enough today? What's the situation today, and what are you expecting from the government?
Yeah, I would say, first of all, it's a good start. I mean, especially if you compare responses of previous governments, like in the 08-09 federal stimulus package, charities and nonprofits weren't present. The fact that in some of these larger instruments that the government has created, that they've used intentionally the language of business, charities, and nonprofits, it's including our whole spectrum, which has really been valued. So something like the wage subsidy program, with the inclusion of the month of June, because they've extended it now a month, that's about a $3.3 billion investment in charities. And we actually can't measure what it might mean for nonprofits because the data just simply doesn't exist. But for registered charities alone, that's about $3.3 billion. There's been another about $900 million of investment in targeted areas. So whether it's women's shelters, specifically vulnerable populations, food security, those kinds of things. That's about another 900 million. So we're sitting at about 4.2 billion investment in this sector. We're still advocating for a grant program because one of the things that we've heard from organizations is because, going back to this lack of reserves issues, this chronic underfunding of infrastructure, that their ability to just pay their leases, pay their computer contracts, pay those fixed costs that are still required, the wage subsidy program's not going to do that. And so there is a need for an instrument that's customized for charities and nonprofits. And then the final thing that we'll talk with government about is around donor incentives. How can donors actually be motivated to do a bit more at these particular times in a sustainable way? So we're on our way, but I wouldn't say that we're there yet.
And what you just said also reminds me, you're talking about donors, and I know that Imagine, correct me if I'm wrong, is it called the Personal Philanthropy Initiative?
Yeah.
A project, which I think at its essence is to encourage more philanthropy among high net worth individuals. Of course, not everyone's in a high net worth situation, but do you think that are we on the verge of, again, there's sort of a paradox here. On the one hand, people need more and people have less to give, but is there a new, I don't know, flavor of philanthropy that we may be seeing coming out of this, or what are your thoughts about where that's going?
Yeah, it may be too early to tell whether there's a new desire to be philanthropic. One of the things, though, I do think has happened is that there has been a new realization about the role of social good in this country. I mean, we are seeing people who were donors who are now the recipients of service. People who've lost their jobs, maybe have been contributing to organizations and are now going to food banks because they need service. You know, we're seeing and hearing a rise in domestic abuse cases where women are being told to stay home and they're being told to stay in places that are not very safe. You know, I was even talking to an organization that serves people who are visually impaired this week, and they were saying that the isolation of a segment of society whose very connection point is through touch, and they're being told don't touch anything, is creating even more isolation. But what I think's been happening is that it's so widespread that for the first time, at least in my memory, I have this sense that citizens are really understanding the weaving of the social fabric and how important it is for charities, nonprofits, and social entrepreneurs to be present because they're now turning to those services. Now, whether that translates into increased philanthropy or social investment, I think it's too early to tell, but I think there may be an opportunity to really build on this awareness or this, I don't want to say appreciation because it's not meant to be a gratification. It's a deeper understanding, I think, is probably a better way of framing it.
Also, so you and I have talked at length at other times about the role of the corporate sector in social change. And I was thinking about a conversation I had with my friend Rachel Hutchison from Blackbaud,
Hmm.
who says a great thing. She says, today change is for everyone. I think that's what she says. And I love that. And so in addition to the players that you've described already, Bruce, you have the corporate sector, who is an important contributor to social change. They, of course, are going through their own challenges.
You bet.
What are you seeing there? Have you been in touch with the corporate sector? Are you seeing anything different?
Yeah. Yeah, we convened a call because we operate, the Caring Company program, which recognizes companies that contribute 1% of pre-tax profit to social good. And we had about 70 participants from the corporate community take place in a chat like this kind of thing. And it was interesting because what we were hearing was, I would call it hopeful, in the sense that companies were already starting to set up COVID funds or do something different. They were already working with their grant recipients to try. Sorry, this will be answered in a second. To try and have a relaxation of requirements. So maybe if it had been directed for a particular program or something, they were saying, let's make the reporting less onerous. Let's take off the restrictions. Let's really be able to provide support. But the question, I think, at the root of it is going to be, if companies themselves are really hurting, will their budgets continue to be there in the mid and longer term?
Right. Great question. And I guess it's too weird. We don't know yet. That's
Yeah.
the challenge, right? And also, I was speaking with my colleague Jesse yesterday about this. One of many basic changes is the whole idea of employee engagement. So important to a lot of charities, where employees of companies are going and doing works of service and so on. Of course, that can't happen now, and how does that impact their capacity and so on? Again, an open question. Another thing that, again, thinking back to our conversations over the last couple of years, I'm curious to talk for a few minutes about social enterprises. The social enterprises, in your organization, correct me if I'm wrong, you represent charities, nonprofits, and also the emerging social enterprise sector, which is intended to monetize social change. Do you have a sense of what that's looking like today? Are these people at risk in the same way the others are? Or
yes, I believe they are. I've certainly heard from a number of leaders of social enterprises who are actually concerned that policy instruments don't include them. And so we've been really mindful to be ensuring that when we've been having conversations with government, that the spectrum of social good constructs or structures is contemplated when policy language is being created. Because one of our observations has been in the past is that when government, not during a crisis type, but when they've created policy, it's almost been like through omission, we've been excluded. And so if not stated as intentionally included, then often the implementation excludes us because the language wasn't there. And so certainly one of the things that we've heard from social enterprises in particular is that their revenue streams were shut off, much the way restaurants were, much the way dry cleaners were, much the way hair salons were, where because many of them were retail facing, that the day that customers couldn't come through the door, their revenues stopped. It may be that for charities, they were still able to exist on grant programs for a while. And so there is a bit of a unique feature that lines up a lot like with small business. So we've been trying to bring that voice to the table when we've had conversations with government.
And that also, the other piece of this, which I think is super interesting today, and I don't know if you've had these conversations with government as well, is of course the whole related to the social enterprise space and how capital is used for the purpose of social change is the whole emerging area of social finance and impact investing and so on. And I know that's also connected to some charitable organizations that have social enterprises. Have you had a sense of what that's looking like today, or are people still interested in investing in social change? Or
I'll be honest with you, I haven't heard much of that lately. It feels like the the tsunami of crisis has has supplemented that discussion at the moment. Though the one thing that I think is an important nuance in here is that, I mean, I think as charities, as registered charities, think about their future going forward. You know, we've been talking about this idea that it's recovery and transformation. It's not recovery to going back to the way it was pre-COVID, because society is going to function differently for the next 18 to 24 months, and maybe for a very long time. So they're going to have to transfer to do something differently. Even with social finance instruments available, I think one of the things that charities are going to have to wrestle with is risk, is appetite for risk, and whether boards will empower staff and themselves to go forward and take on new lines of business that may look different. And are they concerned enough that they won't do it? But at the same time, if they have a need to transform, will that propel social enterprise, particularly affiliated with charities, in a way that we might not have seen before?
And thank you for sharing that. The other thing that just also occurs to me is at Imagine itself, you are both a charity and a social enterprise.
Yes.
And so how is that affecting your organization?
Well, it's actually affecting us quite deeply, because I mean, we have sort of 4 what we would call earned income properties: membership, our Grant Connect offering, our standards program, and then the Caring Company program. So 3 of those lines of business, in a sense, sell to primarily to charities. And so we're already forecasting long into 2021 to try and, at least at this point, have a best guess as to what that means, because in a sense, our customer base is getting the stuffing knocked out of them.
Right.
And so as an entity that has built its financial health on an earned income model, we actually see some negative repercussions down the road. We're not a big major gift organization, that type of thing. It's been earned income. And even on the corporate side, if the dollars decrease and they tumbled it below the 1% threshold, right now our only product offering is an absolute. And so we're talking about, how do we move into rapid design and deployment of new products for both the charitable market and the private sector market, to be able to create offerings that are of value and that can provide ongoing revenue.
Well, I think you just touched on a theme that's come up in a number of these conversations over the last 6 or 7 weeks, which I think is a really important thing. I've been thinking about this every day, which is speed and innovation and speed. So in a situation, you know, as they say invention is a mother of necessity. And I think that's true, but it's true now in a super fast situation. I just wanted to get to a question that we have.
Yeah.
Bruce, someone asks, Erinish, I believe, how do you think corporates can help to protect most vulnerable from mental health crisis during COVID? Is there, I guess, there's a particular role that corporations have or can do to help in the mental health, I guess, of their employees and others?
Yeah, I think, I mean, a lot for me of that question is how you define the most vulnerable. So I think if we're thinking of the most vulnerable in society, I think what corporations can do, invest in those organizations that are working with them, and ensure that those organizations both weather this storm and are positioned to be able to continue their services. Because this is actually one of the areas we often talk about, counter-cyclical demand. And it's interesting that in these types of crises, we have this sort of inverse model in our sector. Demand rises and supply goes down. Demand being mental health services for the most vulnerable, shooting through the roof, or at the same time, supply of revenues and resources to organizations is tumbling. And I think a recognition of that this is one of these areas of society where demand is surging, that companies can get in the game by helping. The other area, maybe just a slight nuance to that, is to actually help with the mental health of those working in the charitable, nonprofit, and social good space. Most organizations aren't large enough to have directors of HR. They kind of wing their HR efforts like on a day-to-day, year-to-year basis. We have many folks in the corporate community who have expertise and knowledge and could be trusted guides and help organizations who maybe don't know what they don't know in terms of thinking through the impacts of these kinds of stress on the health and well-being of their own employees and their volunteers, that could provide those services if they're now sitting at home, if they're maybe not employed in the same way as they were. I think there's a way to help the helpers here.
Thanks. Thank you. I agree. We have another question here from Anne, who asks, can you see a wave of, quote, hyper volunteerism in the future? That is more people who are not working and therefore more people looking for volunteer opportunities.
Totally. I absolutely can see this happening. People are going to be wanting to stay active, busy, and connected as well. If they are, if these are not a furlough or a layoff, but these are more permanent, endings of employment, they'll also be looking to keep resumes current. And one way to do that is to stay connected through volunteerism. I think part of the question will be interesting to see is, are the current patterns of volunteerism, which are trending more towards informal volunteering, will they hold versus formally, in a sense, registering or working through an organization? I mean, when we talk with our colleagues at Volunteer Canada, they often talk about the fact that what they're seeing are citizens helping citizens, that, but doing it directly as opposed to going through an organization to do that. And it'll be interesting to see if that pattern continues.
Also, to me, that brings up a couple things. Partly, one of the things is the government's role in all this. And we're already seeing in some government programs, I think for students, where there's some funding that's tied into students volunteering, which is interesting. And then, of course, a whole other conversation is around universal basic income and what that's going to look like. I personally think that we may be on the verge of implementing that for, in a more formal way. Another question here. We don't have too much time left, but I wanted to share the question from Dean, who asks, he says, my organization is not frontline service. We are an environmental organization. So what are you saying, Bruce, regarding non-frontline charities getting themselves back into the public view and getting public support? A very different category of group.
Yeah, I actually think this is going to be harder. The focus very much now, right now, is on those organizations who are the most visible in helping people that are deemed to be at most risk, whether it's the elderly, whether it's homeless, whether it's domestic abuse. I think that there is going to be a time that will start to shift. And my sense is that that's going to be late June, early July, presuming that the numbers in Canada continue to trend the way that they are, which is a good downward curve now. And I think for those organizations that are sitting outside frontline services, that will be the time for them to start re-entering with their messages. One of the things we've talked about at Imagine Canada is ensuring that we're not tone deaf and entering too early with things. The need will be there, the need will continue. And I think on the environmental front, the particular moment is going to be, what does the future of the economy look like? Is this a moment in time to restructure our economy, which has a more equity and environmental weight to it?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's an interesting kind of combination of things there. On the one hand, it's more challenging for environmental organizations like this one right now. But as you say, like there's a context of, like largely the environmental reasons and human reasons why this crisis has happened, and an increased emphasis on climate change at the same time. So so that actually is something that I think is kind of key to how we're looking at this and change for good, which is it's very difficult for people, but there's also opportunities here.
Yes.
And I think that's most important. So we're almost out of time, but I wanted to ask you one thing, which is that for the charities, nonprofits, and social organizations who are listening today, they have, from your point of view, what are you telling them in terms of what is your, they're saying, Bruce, what should we do? What do we do differently today? What can you share with them?
Yeah, I think this is a unique moment in time to think really honestly about the future of these organizations, of everyone's organizations. I think it's a time where there's permission to be bold, and really look at how the organization both delivers its services and is sustained. I think there's an imperative to move with speed. I mean, many of these event-based revenues are not going to come back until not only is there a vaccine that's widely available, but people trust it enough to gather again in a way that they have. It'll force us to ask ourselves questions about what's extraneous. What are those things that we do that we like to do, but are they core to the services that we've offered? And so I think, we'll see this with organizational leaders. We'll see it with donors to really follow their passion and move into spaces. There's going to be room for everybody within this. But I think for me, at its core, at its essence, is that this is not about, in our case, like Imagine Canada Great Again, going back to where we were. It's about how will social good thrive in an environment, in a society that is likely to operate and function quite differently for the next couple of years.
Thank you. Obviously, it's, this is an incredibly complex situation, and so there's no, I think that the answer to a lot of these questions is everyone saying, well, we'll see, see what happens, which is a situation which people have not found themselves in. Anyway, Bruce, thank you so much for your time today and your perspective. I always value it, and I always learn something when I listen to you, and always think differently. And I hope everyone here is thinking the same way. So appreciate your time and your team's time at Imagine helping set this up. I know everyone's super busy. Also wanted to thank our team at Impact, who remain absolutely committed to change for good, actually, in its broadest sense. And wanted to let everybody here know that later today or tomorrow, you'll all receive an email with a link to a recording of our conversation with Bruce today, and feel free to use that, share it as you see as most helpful. Also wanted to say that we have a special Change for Good next Tuesday at 11 o'clock. I have the really great pleasure of speaking with Biff Naked, who's a Canadian rock star, icon, author, humanitarian, and all around amazing person. So register for that, I think today or tomorrow, and we'll send you the link for that. And thanks again to everybody. We hope these conversations are helpful and source of inspiration and community, as I said earlier. Hope everybody has a great week. Thank you again, Bruce. And
thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.